Welcome to Tucker Carlson. Today we're interviewing a man called Ian Samuel today. Now, why are we interviewing Ian Samuel? Really simple. He's a very interesting thinker, a very smart person. We know Ian Samuel because we invited him on our nighttime show for a debate. It's hard to book debate guests. Either you get people who have ludicrous positions, they're not that fun to talk to because they're not that smart, they can't defend their own views, or you get people who just won't come on. They don't want to come on. They don't want to engage. Very rarely do you get someone that you disagree with on an issue, but whose thinking you admire because they're rigorous thinkers and clear communicators. And that was the case with Ian Samuel. The more debates we had with him on TV, the more I thought, this guy's got something to say. Don't buy all of it, but it's just nice to hear someone who's thought through his views. Anyway, he joins us today. He's a former clerk of the United States Supreme Court. He clerked for Justice Scalia, by the way. He describes himself as a Catholic American socialist. We'll find out what that is. We're happy to have Ian Samuel join us right now. Ian, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. And I remember very well the challenge of being a debate guest. And I thought, well, I've never done this before. I don't know how to do it. So I guess I probably just better say what I think and see how it goes.
Yes, and going in cheerfully and letting your ideas speak for you is a way of debate that I admire.
Well, thank you.
I have to say.
Likewise.
And that is definitely the way that you approached it. So just for background, where are you from? How did you grow up? And how did you get to where you are?
So I grew up in Southern Colorado. I'm 37 years old. So I grew up, I was born in the early 80s. I grew up in Pueblo, Colorado, which is it used to be a steel mining town with a steel mill my dad used to work at, which was, later shut down as a lot of steel mills in small towns were. I mean, there's a river that goes through Pueblo, and of course that's a logical place to put a steel mill, and you could do shipping and stuff. And so I grew up there.
And your dad worked at the mill?
Dad, he worked at the mill. He worked in construction in some form or another. He's still alive. Has worked there in that field my entire life. He worked there for a little while. Mostly worked in concrete. Now he's a carpenter at a hospital. My mother was she's a very successful novelist now. At the time when I was a kid,
really?
Yeah, she was just getting started. Now,
not too many successful novelists left.
Not too many successful novelists left.
That's cool.
I know. I'm very. I have a son's extreme pride in her. But of course, at the time, we're just getting started. She was 24 when I was born, so just really starting out. And so I grew up in Southern Colorado. I'm not the only person in my family to ever go to college. As she always reminds me, I'm the first person to graduate because her graduation from college was interrupted by my birth.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So she always reminds me, she's like, you're not the first person to go get an education, kid. You're just the first person who didn't have a little baby come along and interrupt the last semester.
So you're from a category that we don't hear really much from at all, and that's someone who wound up in a position of high prestige clerking in the Supreme Court for Scalia, who wasn't groomed for it from birth.
Yeah, no, not at all. I mean, I didn't. My parents told me the whole time I was growing up, you got to go to college one day. But my college search process was not like you get, for a lot of families who, grew up on the East Coast, 3 generations from Yale or something, where you go and visit, 6 colleges and you see which one you like. That wasn't how it worked. I mean, I went to a public university in Missouri, a small liberal arts college, and it was basically because it seemed like a good school. They admitted me, gave me kind of a reasonable financial aid package, and they thought, yeah, this place seems like it'd be fine. And so I went to Truman State University, and when I was in law school at NYU, one of my little games with myself was always, people would say, so where did you go to college? I would say, Truman State, and I would count the beats until they say, and where's that? Because you always knew the people who didn't know their presidential history, because Truman's from Missouri. Everybody knows that.
Of course.
But I guess they don't teach you that at Princeton. I don't know.
So when you, just to skip ahead in the story, because I can't resist, so you wind up clerking for a very famous federal judge and then clerking for the most famous Supreme Court justice. And, those clerkships are really hard to get, and they are the ticket to fame and fortune.
Big time.
It's like guaranteed high income for life once you have one of those gigs.
Pretty much.
So, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Unless you die of a stroke or get a drug problem or something, you're going to be.
And even with the latter.
You
would be surprised.
So the people that you run into, how many people went to Truman State or were from Pueblo?
I'm looking forward to meeting the first one. I can't wait.
Did you feel like you were from a different world?
Oh, of course I did. I was very insecure about it, especially in law school. I felt very insecure about it. And one of the things I liked about law school is because, law school exam, the way law school grades are handed out is it's a single blind graded exam at the end of the semester, usually closed book, 4 hours, issue spotting questions, and you're just as good as you are, right? And you can be, it doesn't matter what you have sort of emerged out of. It doesn't matter how much the professor likes or doesn't like you. Because of a blind grading system, a closed book single exam, it's a real opportunity. I mean, it's not a completely, quote, fair competition, but it's the closest that a working class kid from Pueblo is likely going to get in his life. And so I was very insecure about this, and it drove me very hard to work super hard in law school because I felt like I had something to prove.
The best.
It is the best. And it was satisfying. I mean, I love law school.
So you're
for that
describing
reason.
like the promise of American society. I didn't grow up in Pueblo in a working class family, but I grew up in a country where that story that you just told was that was the American story. I finally found myself in a place where I was judged by my efforts and my ability, and I succeeded.
Yeah. That's basically right. And I understand that is, I mean, this is a very artificial set of circumstances and so on, but it's like I feel like I think there's a lot of athletes who emerge out of poor
Right.
southern cities feel like, look, I understand this game is brutal. I understand that football is, you're going to get hurt playing it, but at least if I'm able to play this game better than someone else, that is going to count for something. Being better is going to count for at least something. My ability will sometimes matter, and that is appealing. If the alternative,
Is sports really the only meritocracy left?
sports are one. I'm sure I could think of a second.
There are no obvious ones.
There's no obvious ones because you want to go to things like, I don't know, maybe orchestra musicians.
Yeah.
Right? Because that is a technical skill that, I mean, I realize that some people don't like this, but with the kind of advent of blind auditions, where the musicians come in, they play behind a screen, and they don't even wear shoes because you can hear the difference between a woman's pair of shoes and a men's pair of shoes. So they walk in their socks and they play behind a screen.
Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah, that was actually a big revolution in kind of the gender equity of orchestras is they said, why don't we just have people come out in bare feet? So you can't hear even subconsciously even.
Or you can't hear their footsteps.
You can't hear their footsteps. So you can't hear the click clack of a woman's heels or a man's shoes, or even a woman wearing flats is going to have you can hear it. And so they, at least this is my understanding, will do it in bare feet.
I love that.
It's cool, isn't it?
Well, I just like the idea. I know nothing about orchestra music, but I love the idea of people being judged on their own terms.
Yeah.
By their own ability.
How good does the music sound? That's
So
it.
you must have done fairly well
Pretty well, yeah.
at NYU.
Yeah, I did pretty well. And because I was, one of the things that helped is living in New York as a working class kid with no money, I couldn't afford to do anything fun. So all I could do was work, right? I mean, I would sit in my dorm room and I would read. And, I lived in the student housing and I had a couple of friends and, there were a couple of bars in the village and stuff where but I mean, I didn't have any money to New York's an expensive city even then. I mean, this was 2005 when I started. So all I could really do, all I had the means to do was let's just try to do this well. And I also did feel like, look, this is it. Everything that my parents have done and their parents had done and whatever, it was kid, it was all trying to set up you to have this shot to do something great. So just don't waste it. And so I did pretty well.
What did you think of the many, 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 many of your classmates who were wasting it? I'm just guessing. I don't know your classmates, but I know that world well.
Yeah, some of them did, and some the ones that really struck me were the ones who, because because you have all these exams at the end of the semester, and you start second semester classes before you have the grades from the first semester, right? Because law professors are slow graders. And there was this day when all the grades came out, and a lot of people who thought, they'd never gotten a B in their entire life. And now they realize they have reached the point in their lives where they are kind of normal. They are in the middle of a, very high achieving, high prestige group. But there was a day, and you could see it on people's faces, where it was very clear that they in their mind, they had looked in the mirror every single day and seen a future Supreme Court justice. And they were coming to realize, no, I might just be a rich lawyer. And they took it hard in a way that I would not have, because
I wonder if there's anything better for your soul than having to face the truth about yourself.
well, if you handle it the right way, right? If that's how you take it, if you feel sorry for yourself, then there's nothing worse.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally fair point.
But yeah, there was that day. But then there was the other thing is there were also a lot of people who had emerged out of, I mean, they'd never lived more than 50 miles from Manhattan in their entire life, and they were brilliant. Their parents had been brilliant lawyers, and they were brilliant lawyers.
Yeah.
And they were also at the top of the class, and they were not crazy to look in the mirror and see a future Supreme Court justice. They might be looking at one, right? That, in other words, it's not as simple as anything. It's not as simple as anything.
Right. People are not that simple.
People are not that simple.
No, I've noticed that.
Yeah.
So you wind up clerking for a judge called Alex Kaczynski, who's a very famous judge. Tell me why he's famous and what he's about.
Well, he's famous for a lot of reasons. First of all, he's incredibly smart. He was a Reagan appointee who I think when he was appointed was the youngest federal judge since like Taft or something. He was in his early 30s when Reagan appointed him to the federal judiciary. And he's an immigrant from Romania. I think he moved to Los Angeles when he was like maybe 11 or 12, kind of fleeing Eastern Bloc communism. And he loved Los Angeles, he loved the United States, and he loved Reagan. And he had a relentlessness about him that was infectious. He also spoke with a thick Romanian accent still does. And he was famous because he was really good. And he worked hard, and his opinions were incredibly well written and not narrowly ideological. I mean, I think he would fairly describe himself as kind of a kind of libertarian-leaning Republican. I mean, and keep in mind the context. Like his childhood is formed by this experience of loving Los Angeles versus the kind of
Bucharest.
Yeah, right, exactly. I mean, and that that leaves a mark. He's like, look, I love this place, and I love, especially I noticed the differences.
Yeah.
And the ways the differences matter to me. But he was not a simple ideologue, and he took his independence incredibly seriously. And so, he was famous because he was a great writer and he thought for himself, and also because he famously was just a maniac in terms of his work ethic. When I was clerking for him, the rule basically was, look, I get into the office about 9 a.m. He commutes from his house kind of down by the beach. Expect you to be there. I work all day. I don't usually go out for lunch. I usually leave the office around, basically around sunset. I'll go home, eat dinner. You should go home, eat dinner at the same time. And then you should come back to the chamber so I can talk to you, because I work till about 1:30 in the morning. Oh. And sometimes much later. I mean, he and I workshopped an invitation to a movie night for the visiting judges until about 3 in the morning once, because there was just no detail that was too small for him, and it shows through in the work product. It really did. And and he was famously loyal to his law clerks. He was a tough boss, very tough boss. But I mean, he earned his fame by just working for it and being really good.
His decisions were accessible to non-lawyers.
Absolutely.
And that's why I know about him, because I actually read some of his decisions, and I could sort of make sense of them as someone who knew nothing about the law.
Exactly. Like the audience was always, look, we are writing for an intelligent first-year law student, which is to say somebody who's interested in the law but doesn't know anything. Which is to say, but of course, an intelligent first-year law student is the same as any adult who's interested in something a court is doing.
That's right.
Right? You don't know anything, but you're interested, and so we're writing for them.
So he had that in common with the next famous judge you work for, Supreme Court Justice Scalia, whose decisions were also eloquent and interesting and accessible to non-experts.
Yeah.
What was he like?
Well, he understood. Scalia spent most of his time on the Supreme Court understanding that he was going to be in the minority for a lot of the things that he cared about, right? So, for example, he never had a majority on the court for his views on abortion, for example, which he spent the entire time on the court thinking Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey are like mistakes the court should never have wandered into. But he understood, especially by the end, look, I'm not going to have a majority on this court for these views. So who am I writing for? I'm writing for the casebooks and the students who are going to grow up reading this stuff and trying to make an argument to them that they will believe. Because one day, those people are going to be Supreme Court justices themselves, right? And he has one of his former law clerks on the Supreme Court right now. And there's a generation of federal judges that Trump appointed who all grew up reading those Scalia dissents and who found them convincing. And so he played a kind of a long game where it's like, I might lose right now, but there will come another day. And I'm writing for the people who are going to be here later, maybe long after I'm gone.
He believed in words.
Yeah, he really, his father was a professor of Romance languages.
Yeah.
Right? And he was an only child. And
what was he like?
When I knew him, he was an older man. And he always described his law clerks as being like his nieces and nephews, which was, I think, was a touching description from an only child, because he didn't have any nieces or nephews. He didn't have any brothers and sisters. He was a very, very, kind boss, like a tough boss, but especially, the way that he treated the people who worked for him gave me a permanent intolerance for dickhead bosses.
Yeah.
Because it's like, look, this man is one of the most famous American jurists who's ever going to exist. He has more than one commission from the president hanging in chambers. He has enough that there's a spare hanging in the law clerk's room because there needs to be somewhere to put it. If he can treat the people who work for him with respect, so can you, right?
Yeah.
No matter who you are.
That's exactly right.
You know what I mean? He didn't have to treat his 29-year-old law clerk with an ounce of respect. It wouldn't have made a damn bit of difference in his life if he did or not. I would have been happy to be there and I would have done whatever he said. But he did. And there is a kind of personal decency in that I will not forget. And
it's wonderful.
Yeah, it is wonderful. And he raised 9 children on a government salary, which is not nothing. And he went home to eat dinner with his wife, Maureen, who's still alive, every day at about 6 o'clock.
Wow.
Pretty good.
So what? So you work for him. He's famously an observant Catholic. Mm-hmm. You are too, which might be the most unusual thing about you, given your life trajectory.
And just being an American, yeah.
Being an American. So, what has that been like? You're at this level, but you're also a believing Catholic. Do you rub up against other people because of that?
Well, yeah, sure. It is weird to genuinely believe in God in elite spaces a lot of the time. Because it's jarring to people. I think the assumption a lot of times is that even if you are culturally Catholic or whatever, you don't really believe this shit, do you? But
right.
But no, I really do. And one of the nice things about probably one of the only good things that's ever emerged out of social media for me is making other friends who are around my same generation, who are also smart men and women who are we really believe this. This is it's all true.
How did you wind up believing it?
Well, like Aquinas says, you can't have faith without grace. You can't have grace without grace. It's a free gift. And the real answer to that is, I don't know. But I'm in other words, I don't think of faith as something that is like a series of propositions that you come to in a logical matter.
Yes.
It doesn't. I don't think it works that way, or at least it hasn't worked that way for me. It's more like a gift that you are offered, often more than once, and often in very, very subtle ways that they take time. They build. For most of us, it doesn't happen with the archangel, appearing to do the Annunciation, right? Usually, for most of us, it's a little more subtle than that. But it's a gift, and you get to say yes or no, and you probably aren't going to be asked only once. But the truth is, as long as I've been alive, both of my parents believe in God. Neither of them are particularly, I wouldn't describe them as especially religious exactly, but I have never been able to really I've never been able to not believe in God at all. And so if you just, as time passes and you find yourself unable to say no enough times, you will get somewhere. But it's a gift. I mean, it's not something we merit, right? It's not something I earned,
right?
And that's why, when I try to talk about faith and religion and stuff with people who don't have any, I don't come from some kind of position of superiority, right? At all. It's
just the opposite.
Exactly, just the opposite.
Christianity is a daily reminder of your own failings. It's predicated on your understanding of your own failings.
Indeed, exactly. The conversation.
So, but you live in a world on the left where that's really unusual.
It's pretty unusual, yeah. The kind of we are a tiny minority. The kind of left Cath world it's very small, and there are always these kind of persistent fantasies about like, oh, the religious left will rise soon. No. Probably not. Not anytime.
We're not going to see another Dorothy Day.
Well, I mean, the world may never see another Dorothy Day, but that is that's the hero. That's the model, right?
Yeah.
That's the kind of people that we love. But it's okay. I mean,
you could pick a worse model.
Yeah, you could pick a worse model, and you understand. Look, the church is strongest on the cross, right? Yeah, you're small. Nobody agrees with you. Yeah. Welcome to first century Rome, pal. That was a pretty fruitful period for Jesus Christ, and you'll be okay. It's not your job to win the world. It is your job to pray and discern what you're supposed to do, and that might be nothing grand, pal. No matter what your ambitions for yourself are, your job might be change this baby's diaper, and that's what I'm asking you to do.
Yeah, there's nothing better for your soul than getting hit in the face once in a while, regularly, in fact.
Indeed. The Catholic Church, we have a collection of people who got their ass kicked so hard they died. We call them martyrs, and they're saints, and they're in heaven. So
what do you think, getting back to the court? That's a nice description. I like that.
I stole that from somebody. I can't.
No, it's wonderful. So as someone who clerked on the famous Supreme Court of the United States, the highest court in the land, the final word in our constitutional democracy, when you hear people like Congressman Hank Johnson of Georgia suggest the following, I want to get your reaction. Here he is.
But this natural expansion stopped after the Civil War, leaving us today with the historical oddity of 13 circuit courts of appeal and only 9 justices. I believe it's time to go back to this tradition and have at least 13 justices.
So that's Hank Johnson calling for a return to antebellum tradition. Which made me laugh.
Lincoln packed the court.
Yeah, good, nice.
Yeah.
But I wonder, I mean, when you worked on the Supreme Court, when you clerked on the Supreme Court, it's the biggest deal there is in the legal world, because the court is the biggest deal there is, because the court has unquestioned authority and legitimacy. And I wonder if you believe that authority and legitimacy are going to continue.
No, I don't. And the reality is, the Supreme Court as an institution is deciding a lot of questions of modern American life that are not lawyers' questions, right? Like, should there be abortion? That is not a legal question. And people can have good faith views about that, but I promise you, those views are not going to be grounded in some legal text, nor should they be. People can have good faith opinions about, should pornography be legal? Should same-sex couples be able to marry? Run it down. Should questions of public sector employee unions, all this different stuff. These are not essentially legal questions, right? They're not like, we read the statute and it tells us what the answer is. These are questions that are, in part moral questions. Some of them are questions about just the structure of governance. And it is not healthy that we have assigned to the Supreme Court the resolution of these things. And people...
How should they be resolved?
I mean, you could have, like, a legislature pass laws about them.
Oh, like in a democratic fashion.
Like a right example.
Like a democracy.
Like in a democracy. Like in the United Kingdom, they had a very fruitful debate about abortion in the Parliament when they were considering it, and it was a free vote. And reading the transcripts of those debates about abortion, they are a lot more satisfying reading than the Supreme Court's opinions in Roe v. Wade and in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, right? Because they're honest. People, the members of parliament were able to stand up and say, look, this is what I think and here's why. And this is why I'm going to vote the way I'm going to vote. And they disagreed with each other. I disagreed with many of those people. But at least it's like we're conducting this in an honest way. And if we change our mind later as a society, then we can change our mind. Whereas with the Supreme Court, you kind of lock this stuff in, and there is this pretense that, well, the Constitution has settled this, right? That's what the plurality opinion in Casey says is the Constitution calls us to this common resolution of this, contested matter. And it's all just bullshit because everybody knows that these people don't know any better than you whether there should be abortion, same-sex marriage, pornography, whether there should be labor unions at all. They don't know any better than you do. They're just lawyers, right? I mean, and think about this. This is a really an odd thing. There are no non-lawyers on the Supreme Court. You might think, well, it's appropriate. It's a court of law. But if they're charged with deciding major social questions, why is there not like a soldier, a nurse, a stay-at-home mother on the court? If what we're going to charge them with deciding is just how should society be run, and that's crazy. It's no way to run a country. The idea that major questions of social policy are going to be decided because Ruth Bader Ginsburg got sick and died 3 months earlier rather than 3 months later, that's crazy. That is no way to run a country. And I don't think that, and you sort of saw this during the early part of the 20th century, during the Lochner era and FDR's, kind of crisis around court packing stuff, where people have a sense that they ought to be able to run their own country. And that especially if they think the Supreme Court is basically up there just doing lawyers' work, they will leave them alone. But if they think that they're up there sort of making moral decisions, they might get the sense, and here I'm just completely ripping off Scalia's dissent in Casey, but it is still quite true, they will get the sense our moral judgments are just as good as theirs. And that will impair the legitimacy of the court. It will. It absolutely will. And so one way or another, the domain of questions in American life that the Supreme Court decides is going to have to shrink. And it should shrink. And, I think that honestly...
Because there's an authoritarian quality to this.
Yeah, these people serve for life. What other democratic institution has its officers serve for life? The House of Lords? Yeah, right? Think about it. That's nuts. And honestly, I think many of the justices would actually prefer to be left to lawyers' work. They would actually probably be happier day to day if they were like, let's just...
Doing interstate commerce decisions?
Yeah, let's figure out what the APA means for this particular agency decision. The kind of boring crap no one will bother us about. And then, by the way, we read about in case books, that sounds okay. Or doing even real constitutional interpretation, like, okay, what is the real scope of the protection against unreasonable search and seizure, based on our, we'll do some historical digging and stuff like that.
But the court could do that if it wanted, because the court doesn't have to take cases.
Yeah, they could. But as Lord Acton tells us, power corrupts, and I think the absolute version maybe even corrupts absolutely, something like that.
But it's self-defeating, as you point out.
It is self-defeating.
So the more power the court reserves to itself, in the end, the less legitimacy it has.
Yeah, and of course, think about it, because if you're in the position of one of the individual members, you think, well, we can't, if you're, let's say that you're on the kind of right flank of the court, you can't just say, well, we're going to engage in a kind of minimalism, James Bradley Thayer kind of let's let the Democratic branches do what they want. When the other guys, when they're in charge, they're going to come in and just impose their policy preferences. We can't unilaterally disarm, and vice versa, right? And that makes sense to me, which is why the only kind of solution is going to have to come externally. It's going to have to say, look, we're going to narrow the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, or we're going to, there's a lot of ways that you can say, look, we have decided this court is going to play a smaller role in American public life, and we're going to impose that on you, and that would be very good.
You make a very strong case for that.
Good.
So I want to ask you about politics. So you clerk for Scalia, you clearly think a great deal of him. You just quoted one of his decisions and one of the most controversial, probably, pieces he ever wrote on the Supreme Court in his dissent on Casey. And so, you're a Scalia Supreme Court clerk.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And yet you're a Bernie Sanders supporter.
Big time. I almost wore a Bernie hat today, but I thought, no hat in the studio.
No hat in the studio. It's like a church. This is our cathedral.
Exactly.
So, this brings me back to 2016 when I'm working for Fox, but I don't have full-time employment, so I've got a lot of free time. And I thought, this really interesting thing is happening. Trump is emerging and Bernie Sanders is emerging. And neither one is a natural for me just because that's not the way my brain works at the time. But I'm intrigued by Trump. I'm repulsed by Bernie. But I don't really know that much about Bernie, except I lived in Burlington when he was the mayor there.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was a house painter. Okay. And so I knew him from that, but I didn't know much about him. So I went up at a Bernie rally in Council Bluffs, Iowa, right across the river from Omaha. And I was completely shocked by the people that were there. It was not what I was expecting at all. That was the moment I thought, well, maybe this is a little more interesting than I'm not a Bernie supporter, just clear. However, I thought it was going to be all like, rich kids in Subarus. It wasn't.
No.
It looked a lot like a Trump rally in the people that were there. And I thought, well, this is the weirdest thing I've seen today. Like, what does this mean? It means a lot of things. But I just want to play a quick bite. It's number 3 here. This is from a Democratic debate, 2015, Bernie Sanders and economics. Now, as you watch this, you'll tune it out because there's Bernie yelling about billionaires again. But ask yourself, like, is this that different from what Trump was saying, actually, at the time? Watch.
I'm running for president because our economy is rigged, because working people are working longer hours for lower wages, and almost all of the new wealth and income being created is going to the top 1%. I'm running for president because I'm going to create an economy that works for working families, not just billionaires.
So at the time, I think I first heard that, I was like, okay, the class warfare thing again. Now I'm looking back, and I just want to say I don't support Bernie. I don't think he was I don't think he had what it takes to actually do that. Maybe nobody does. But just like reading from the text of that, I don't disagree with the word of it. Our economy is rigged. Working people are working longer hours, and almost all the new wealth is going to the top 1%. I want to create an economy that works for working families, not just billionaires. Like, where do I disagree with that?
Spot the lie. The only thing that's wrong in there is the almost. Actually, more than almost all of the new wealth is going to the top. Actually, they have gotten more than all of the new wealth. They've gotten all of the new wealth and then actually shaved off of some of the old wealth. So it's actually understatement. Yeah.
See, this is a problem. I'm not getting my soapbox to your interview, but I would just say in one sentence, there are a lot of problems with an economy like this, but the main one for those of us who are conservative, believe in conserving the good parts of our society, that creates a volatile society. And that's how you get like massive upheaval and you start destroying things.
Yes.
If we don't fix that, that will happen to us.
Yes, it does, exactly, because it leaves people in a situation, and a lot of people feel this way. I mean, think about if right now, if you are 25 years old and you are working as a waitress, or you're working as a retail salesman at Best Buy or something, where my brother has worked for many years, or whatever. You're just a normal 25-year-old person, and you ask yourself, am I ever going to be able to afford to buy a house? And the answer for a huge number of people who are my age and younger is that's a joke that I'd be able to buy a house. How am I ever going to be able to do that? Am I ever going to be able to take a vacation? I'd love to have children. Maybe I can afford to have 1, maybe 2, but childcare for 3 children when both me and my spouse have to work full time, how am I going to afford childcare for 3 children? I'd love to have a big family, but I just can't afford it. What is your buy-in to the project of this country at that point?
I couldn't agree more.
Right?
I absolutely couldn't agree more. And also, what's the point of the country if people can't have children?
What is the point of it?
No, seriously, what is the point of this?
What's the point of your life? If you want, so you look around and you're like, yeah, I'm told that this is a great place. But it's not that great for me, and it's not that great for anybody I know. I mean, it's fine. I'm not starving to death or anything. But I just don't really feel like I have any hope in it or a sense in the future that is a volatile situation. Because people like that, when they're told, look, let's burn the whole thing down, it becomes a lot more plausible than if they're like, why would I want to burn the whole thing down? I have a house, I have 4
I'm a homeowner with kids.
I'm a homeowner, I have 4 or 5 kids, my life is good. Why would I want to burn things down?
Even if my life is bad, I'm vested in the society, I'm rooted here, I can't go anywhere, I have all these kids, I'm part of it. I want to make it better.
Exactly, I'm part of this. And that, I agree with you, that it is not so for a lot of people.
So then you got to kind of wonder, I mean, not to, oh God, I'm sorry, you get a little older, Ian, and you can't help yourself from repeating the same obsessions that you have. But one of mine is, where are all the pro-family people?
Where are they?
If you can't afford to have children, then if you're a pro-family person, and there are a lot, I know a lot of, I am one of them, like, you should be really upset about that and working to change it. But instead, the pro-family people are throwing libertarian talking points at us and, well, that's the way markets work.
Right, that's the way markets work. Right, exactly. Like, two of my favorite I mean, it's hard to call them favorites, but two of my statistics that I love to kind of trot out are, most people who have children wish they had more than they have. And the most common reason that they give for not having more is they can't afford it.
Ugh.
And most people who have had an abortion had kids already. So in other words, most people who are having an abortion, it's not because they think, well, I'm not ready for parenthood. Most of them are mothers already. And a vast majority of those people are like, I am put in this grim position of I have to either take food out of the mouths of the kids I have, or I have to get an abortion. And that is not a happy choice for a lot of people. And I'm not saying that that's everybody, but I'm saying that
awful.
That is pretty grim stuff. And it would be a reasonable first principle to say, look, let's build a society around an idea that a single labor income is enough to support a whole family of any size. You have as many kids as you want. You want to have one, that's great. You want to have 8, that's great.
That sounds like the patriarchy, Ian. What are you against corporate feminism?
Well, I mean, look, it could be a single woman's labor income. Dad could stay home.
It's so funny why they're so threatened by that.
It's because children are very threatening. Because families are threatening.
But Elizabeth Warren wrote a book on this years ago with her daughter, and I don't like Elizabeth Warren, but I loved that book, and I love the idea, just the premise of the book, which is one income ought to be enough to float a family. Like,
this is the two-income trap, right?
The two-income trap.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I complimented that book at great length on the air. And, you had people say, well, why are you complimenting Elizabeth Warren? Like I'm sucking up to Elizabeth Warren. Obviously, I wasn't. But because I love the idea, and I think it's really important. It should be at the center of all of our policies. That's the number one most important policy, maybe even more important than, like, ending the patriarchy in Afghanistan or bulldozing Syria. Like, that's the most important thing.
Right.
And then the Elizabeth Warren people, all the people on the left are like, oh, that's just because you're a sexist. You want women to work at Citibank.
Right.
Huh?
And this is the old, the funny way that this plays out is when you talk about family policy, you talk about, okay, what do you do about the problem of childcare, right? And the two traditional solutions are, number one, you can have universal, just public childcare that's basically, just like extend pre-K kind of downward. Or you could pay home caregivers a child, like you could basically pay them a home caregiving allowance. You can pay people to stay home with their kids. And what most people of my kind of thinking, and including me, think is, it'd be fine with me if you just gave people a choice. If you want to stay home with your kids, we will pay you to do that. And if you want to avail yourself of a universal childcare system, that's fine too. It's your choice. But when you suggest this, you will get people every time saying, you're discouraging women's participation in the workforce by doing that.
I hope so.
Right. I'm like,
I hope they were sending, I don't hope to discourage women from working, of course. What I hope to make clear is that it is better for everybody if people have the chance to raise their own kids. Most people want to raise their own kids.
Right. Actually. That's the thing, is it's not discouraging anything. It is giving people a free choice. And you know what? For most people, and the way this happens a lot of the time is
you have to be a really sick person to be against that.
Well, yeah, but you think, especially because for most people, they're like, going to work is just a job, right?
Yes.
Like for a lot of very accomplished people, their work and their career is it's very meaningful to them. And that's good. Like, my work is very meaningful to me, as I assume it is to you. And there are a lot, I get that. But for most people, men and women, it's just some job they have to show up to every day. And they would actually prefer to stay home and play with their kids because it's better than toil.
Well, it's also better for their kids, and it's better for society. Like, kids raised by their own parents and not some, like, DMV bureaucrat are better off. Like, what? And if you can't say that, then maybe the whole system is being rigged by Sheryl Sandberg to convince us that corporate loyalty is more important than family loyalty.
Yeah, we got to get you out that, like, look, we need more widgets in the machine.
Yeah.
And especially if, hey, by the way, we're going to tie your healthcare to it. So not only do you have to show up back to work after maybe a week of maternity leave, maybe 0 days, but you can't quit either because your child's wellness visits are not going to be covered by our employer health insurance plan if you quit. Like, we have you and we're going to keep you. And for a huge number of people, they would take less money to just be able to stay home with their children. And again, we're talking about when kids are little. Kids are going to go to school eventually once they're in kindergarten and high school and stuff. This doesn't arise because, then, if you want to work, you want to do whatever during the day, that's different. But when a kid is 3 years old and one of his parents would genuinely rather not earn a labor income, but would rather work to raise that kid as a home caregiver, and just pay them to do that.
Yes.
Just give them some money to do that, especially when the choice is a free one. And it's like, look, no, there's a system of universal childcare you can use if you want. But the threat is that, but not enough people are going to choose that. Not enough people
are going to choose
that.
to become corporate drones. But just, I'm sorry, I try to get emotional when I talk about politics, but this is one area that's so repulsive to me that I can't believe.
It's very upsetting.
Anyone would say that out loud.
Yeah, but people do. They will say.
By the way, both parties just said it. The Vice President of the United States and the Republican National Committee both sent out statements recently saying the biggest tragedy is not enough moms are returning to work. Really?
Yeah.
That's like the only upside. To this whole disaster of COVID is that maybe some kids are getting more time with their parents.
Right. Maybe you get people who they've spent this year. And I heard these endless stories about how, it was very popular to say, boy, it's driving me crazy to be at home with my kids all day. And people said that a lot. I spent a lot of time at home with my son during COVID. I loved it.
Yeah.
Right. It was great. I almost felt guilty because COVID was one of the happiest periods of my life because I was with him so much.
I agree with that. Me too.
And I thought, well, probably every parent might feel something. I mean, every person I've known, including, very accomplished lawyers, when they had, 6 months of maternity leave or whatever, a lot of them were like, I kind of don't want to go back to work.
Of course
not. I'm going to. I will. I understand it's old, whatever. But like, everybody feels some drive to be with their own. I mean, kids are great. They're cute. Of course, people are going to choose that over toil, right? And not because it's a lot easier. It's actually a lot harder. I mean,
much harder.
You can't fake your way through a day with a 2-year-old the way you can.
I didn't even know any of this. I got married really young. I came from a non-traditional family. I didn't understand. I didn't know anything about this stuff whatsoever. And my wife, I assume, would always work, whatever. She comes home, first day at work after maternity leave ends, and she's like, I'm not working anymore.
Yeah, I'm done. This sucks.
Yeah, and she raised our children, and it was the single most important decision we ever made. It wasn't even a decision I had anything to do with. It was just like a...
No, exactly. No, nor could you have overridden it if you were like, no, I think you need to. I think the answer would have been, I don't work for you.
But yeah, well, exactly. But I didn't know. I mean, the thing is, I didn't grow up in some Amish community or something with like strong gender. I mean, I just had no preconceptions whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So I just watched it happen, and I can tell you, and I probably shouldn't say this in public because it's judgy, but it's just the truth. That was the most important thing that either of us ever did, was that thing. It really, really paid dividends in joy and in our children. So
yeah, I feel a lot of jealousy actually for people who's like the vocation that they're called to for this period of life is like, it's so rewarding and you can't fake it. Like, and it just like, there are days when I'm with Seamus at the end of the day, and maybe it's just been him and me from 6 a.m. when he woke up early, and then he won't take a nap, and then it's 8:30 and he's like still losing his mind. And I am beat at the end of the day in a way that I've never been beat working at any job in the same way. And it feels good to be like emptied out that way for that reason. It's like, this is what the strength is for.
Oh, of course.
Feels great.
Amen.
And I know that a lot of people would say, I'll take less money to do that. Sure. And that's the threat.
We'd all be better off. I mean,
sounds great.
For sure. So I have to ask you, just bring it back to politics just for a second. So Bernie Sanders really captures your heart and imagination.
He did, yeah.
Yeah. I'm not mocking you at all.
Thank you.
No, I'm really not.
No, he did. I love our beautiful boy.
So Now that's going too far again. But, beautiful boy. But he doesn't get the nomination.
No.
2 cycles in a row,
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders has more support, much higher level of intensity of support. He has a movement, not just a campaign. And both times, it's taken from him by the forces of the Democratic Party establishment. And that's just true, and we know it's true because we have the emails. What do you make of that?
I mean, look, Bernie is who he is. He never had that kind of Trump edge for combat, right? And a lot of people will say, well, if he'd gone after Hillary the way that Trump had gone after Jeb, right? Boy, everything would be different. And I can't prove that that's not true. But it is not a symmetrical position for the following reasons. Bernie had the deck stacked against him in a way that no matter basically what he did, the answer was going to be from MSNBC, from the New York Times, from every respectable outlet, like, well, that's wrong. That just proves why he can't be president. If he had gone after, like when he said to Hillary, I'm sick and tired of hearing about your damn emails. A lot of people say, no, he should have gone after her for the damn emails. But of course, if he had, then what's the story the next day? Bernie's buying into right-wing talking points. Bernie's not a real Democrat. Bernie is a crypto-fascist.
Hold on,
on the
wait. You don't, okay, so, yes. But you don't have to go after her on the emails. And echo Fox News. Fox News is going after her on the emails. We were. Why don't you say, Hillary Clinton, you are the definition of corporate stooge. I mean, you're just a puppet of the billionaire class, which she is.
Well, I mean,
why wouldn't you say that?
I think he kind of did. I mean, so like, for example, the speeches that she gave to Goldman Sachs and things like that, he hit her hard on that stuff. And, you know, what was the response? The response is, well, we're going to mute how much that gets covered. We're going to explain, well, everybody does that, which it's kind of like the point. That's why it's that, yeah, on the cusp of a revelation. Everybody does that. That's what we're talking about. These kind of tactical questions, I mean, clearly he didn't get the nomination, and so it's not like you can prove.
But it wasn't. But the process wasn't fair.
Exactly. And because it's not a fair process, it is hard for me to say that any difference in tactics would have made a difference.
But after 16, so we learn after, the DNC emails become public. They were not hacked by Russia. It seems very clear it was an internal hack, probably by a Bernie supporter to draw attention to what was actually happening at Democratic Party headquarters. And so we kind of know, and we don't kind of know, we know. And he didn't really say anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's.
I'm not attacking him. I'm not trying to beat up on your hero. But why didn't he?
So I mean, I'd be willing to criticize him for it because.
But what do you think that was about?
This is just who he is. I mean, look. Remember, in 2016, Bernie Sanders kind of emerges running what he thought was a kind of message campaign.
Yeah, right.
Right. He didn't ever expect this to be. He announced it like standing in front of the Senate briefly to like 10 reporters and then went back inside to like vote on the name of a post office or something. And it caught fire in a way that he was definitely not expecting. And it's not like he was some kind of Eugene Debs figure who was like built for this kind of, class war, socialist revolution kind of conflict. He is basically a liberal democracy electoralist who he's built to kind of in some way play by the rules. And that clearly made him.
But he was competing against people within his own party who were violating the rules.
Oh, of course.
And I'm not a Democrat. I didn't vote for anybody involved, but I looked at that and just as an American, I was like, that's unfair.
It is unfair.
You can't allow that kind of crap to happen.
Right. But think about, every option is bad, right? And so this option didn't work. But that's not to say that other options would have. Like, let's say we'd gotten past Biden somehow. Let's say he had, believe me, after that South Carolina primary, and when Super Tuesday went bad in 2020, every single one of us in those one-on-one debates with Biden, all of us were like, please, just hit him hard. Just tell people, just don't say this is Joe Biden, my friend, who I have a lot of respect for.
He's a shill for the credit card company.
This is the senator from MBNA.
Yeah.
Tell people that. Talk about the crime bill. Talk about everything that this man has done. Hit him. Talk about the Iraq War. Like, we know you believe this stuff, but he wouldn't. Now,
wait, I'm sorry. Long before Super Tuesday, you had a month before, you had the Iowa caucuses. And
look how
and all of a sudden, like, they couldn't count the votes in Iowa and then Pete Buttigieg somehow wins.
Yeah, but
was that on the level, Ian Samuel?
No, it was not on the level. But here's the thing: is the Iowa caucuses. Actually, I was really proud of the way the campaign handled that, because they did go hard on Biden on Social Security. David Sirota was like the author of this extremely specific and extremely effective attack on Biden, that he had been in favor of Social Security cuts, and they hit this and hit this and hit this all the way up to the Iowa caucuses, and it worked. And then after the Iowa caucuses, when Pete was telling everybody that he'd won, Bernie came again. Bernie hit Pete way harder than he ever hit Biden, right? He said, "I won," and they said, "Well, why do you say you won?" And he said, "Because I got 3,000 more votes," right? Just flicked him like a bug, which is exactly what Pete deserves. And that was great. New Hampshire, Nevada, we're rolling, right? And so it was this very aggressive posture, and then just South Carolina, Super Tuesday, and now we're one-on-one against Biden, and he just won't hit him the way that he hit Pete. You can call that a mistake, and clearly it didn't work, so nothing else, doing something else, if it didn't work, wouldn't have been any worse. But remember, let's say we'd gotten past Biden. Mike Bloomberg was waiting right around the corner in all of those states with the most well-financed campaign in the world. Maybe we get past Mike Bloomberg.
Whose only purpose really was to stop Bernie Sanders.
His only purpose. That's why as soon as Biden emerged, Bloomberg basically walked away. He was like, I barely paid the capital income on my fortune to run this campaign. I don't care about any of this. I just didn't want Bernie to be president. And then if we'd gotten past Bloomberg, we'd gotten the nomination, remember, there was a kind of feckless, never Trump movement in 2016. But the never Bernie people in 2020, you would have been surprised at the number of people who would have said, boy, it's surprising to hear me of all people say this, but I just think that we can't entrust the nuclear codes to a confirmed socialist, and Trump hasn't been so bad, and blah, blah, blah. In other words, we might not have ever been as close as we thought. We got as close. 2016 was the real shot. That was, because we caught them napping, basically. They didn't expect us coming, and so they weren't ready. And we got close. By 2020, they were ready for us, and there were multiple firewalls. And Biden was Biden was always the one I was worried about, because I was like, he's the only one with any kind of authentic working class base. Black working class voters in the South really have an affection for Biden in a way they don't have for Bernie Sanders. And that might be a problem. And it was. But in other words, all this to say is, yeah, we didn't get the nomination. We didn't get the presidency. But that might just be an illustration of the fact that this kind of electoral politics strategy at this point in time for the socialist left, we might not be ready to do it. We might have to, we just may not have, we don't have, the entire Democratic media establishment is like bought and paid for, right? They were going to be for anybody but Bernie Sanders the entire way. And as soon as it was Joe Biden, as soon as Joe Biden won that South Carolina primary, the word went out. This is the guy who can beat Trump. You got to vote for Joe Biden. And cable news viewers who watch MSNBC and who make up a huge number of the voters in Democratic primaries, they were like, well, I trust these people. I trust, I trust Rachel Maddow, and I trust, all these people. They're good faith actors. They've been telling me the entire time about the danger of Trump, and they say this is the way to beat him. I guess that's what I'm going to do.
It's just interesting, though, that on that channel and on CNN, and these are engaged, the anchors are engaged Democratic voters, and they're power centers in the party. Mm-hmm. That none of them were for Bernie. They were all for Joe Biden, who doesn't, strictly speaking, even exist. He's just
right.
There's no Joe Biden.
He's an avatar. Yeah, no, not really. No, because first of all, how are you going to have a career in Democratic media, Democratic politics, and stuff like that if you're not for the team?
Yeah,
that's
a good point.
And the 5-word summary of Bernie's appeal, which was always meant as a criticism of him, was Bernie's not even a Democrat. And I was like, put that on the signs, please. Bernie Sanders, he's not even a Democrat. Great, perfect. I could not think of a better pitch to a normal person than it's like, look, this person is not a kind of right-wing capitalist, but don't worry, he's not a Democrat either. It's like, well, now I'm listening. That sounds good. Who is this guy? But that's not. But if your job is to be an organ of the Democratic Party, then you can't be for that. I mean,
No, good point.
it's
So why does, last question to you, but why, if all the people we've talked about, you're frustrated by what's happening in the Democratic Party, et cetera, but the one person for whom you seem to express particular contempt, the former mayor of South Bend, Indiana.
Yeah, Pete.
What is it about Pete Buttigieg? In our scripts, it's spelled Buddha Judge, just so I can pronounce it correctly.
Yeah. There's a lot that I find contemptible about him. I mean, the one thing, and everyone's forgotten about this, the man is clearly a CIA cutout, an intelligence guy. It's obvious from his career. But the thing that bothers me the most...
You think Pete Buttigieg is CIA?
For sure. I mean...
Asset.
I mean, I don't even know if asset. I mean, he clearly worked for the agency. I mean, he spends time as a management consultant and then in Iraq with some kind of non-specific, not well-explained job. He does these kind of travels and writes op-eds about my time meeting with the government officials of this kind of country. It's not clear how I was just backpacking, and I just ran into the prime minister of Swaziland or whatever. But that's fine. But what I have the most contempt about him for is that he is like the perfect creature of what the modern Democratic Party looks like. He's like, look, I gotta talk kind of like I sound like Obama. I'm gonna be, 30-something years old and the mayor of my hometown in the middle of Indiana, and just magically a plausible candidate for president, and just no one's gonna kind of push back on that. I'm gonna just a man utterly free of principle, where he tweets in this kind of indignant way, oh, I solemnly swear I truly do support Medicare for all. And then just 6 months later, he's like, hey, you didn't really believe that, did you? Just an empty vessel. And the best thing, one of the best things I've ever loved about Joe Biden was that after Pete dropped, remember, Pete dropped out before Super Tuesday, having, according to him, won the Iowa caucuses and clearly came in second in New Hampshire. He drops out before Super Tuesday. That is unprecedented in history. I mean, usually if you think you won the Iowa caucuses and you came in second in New Hampshire, you'd stay in through Super Tuesday a few weeks later, right?
Through June? Are you joking?
Right, exactly.
Yes.
Can you imagine? But he drops out, of course, because we all know, probably Obama picked up the phone and said, you need to do this for me, Pete. And then Biden sticks him with Secretary of Transportation. That's how you do it. That's how you eliminate a smart kid rival. It's like... Your job is to explain to people how their taxes for driving are going up. Have a good time, Pete. This is not my first rodeo, right? I may still think it's 1978. But this is how we did it back in 1978, kid. So you wouldn't know about that since you weren't born. But
I love that. That went right over my head.
Yeah.
Takes a lot for me to say I admire Joe Biden, but in that one specific way, I do.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's like him sending Kamala Harris down to explain to everybody why refugees are bad now. It's like, oh, you think you're gonna be a plausible rival to power for me? It's your job to do all the border stuff. Have a good time, Kamala.
That's so well deserved.
Yes, it is. No, I mean Joe Biden. He's not. He has a low coming about him that is like, I do know how to play the inside game of politics, and you are not you are not going to push me out of a 2024 run because you have some building power base in the party. No, you're not. Your job is to be the gas tax guy, and your job is to go to Central American countries and say, don't be refugees anymore. Have fun.
When you spend over 300 years in the United States Senate, you learn these skills.
You do, exactly.
Ian Samuel, that was great. I'm so glad you came. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Great to see you.
All right, good.
The name of the show is Tucker Carlson Say. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on Fox Nation. We'll see you every night at 8 p.m. on the Fox News Channel.